guys have any questions yet?
Yeah. I was just wondering, you just briefly mentioned like how much, like there was like a lot of rivers back out east. I was wondering, do you think people back out west use the Colorado or Rio Grande?
No, no. Rio Grande on its lower portion, yes.
Yeah.
That's part of the, but it's minimal.
Uh-huh.
As far as we can tell, they're not really using it because part of it is that in the east you've got access to big trees in the Arkansas River. Well, not Arkansas so much, the lower Mississippi Valley, and that like cypress were being heavily utilized. So big ones. I mean, some of the width is almost as wide as this room is wide.
Okay.
And huge boats that were going to be traded out of the lower Mississippi Valley along the waterways. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem for the lower portion, well, for the Rio itself, is that the amount and the types of trees you have available are not conducive to big boats. And so as a result, you really didn't have the mechanism for boat usage until later when there are some groups that are coming along the coast of Texas and then along the southern portion of the Rio that may have been, they're connected with Caddo along the Sabine and then the Calancoa, who are in between Houston and the mouth of the Rio.
Yeah.
So without the mechanism, you don't have the usage. So almost everything in the Southwest is all by foot, which is also why they're so limited in terms of social development. Their political structure is not as complex as the East, and also why you're not moving commodities from one area to another, only very lightweight, high-value trade items that are mostly coming out of the Gulf of California and then in Four Corners and the Rio Grande Pueblos. In fact, Spiro has stuff, olivella, and possibly cotton, which is coming out of that trade network and coming into the Alabates Quarry area. Because Spiro, folks, can take a boat along the Canadian all about 20 miles north of Alabates Quarry. And so Alabates becomes the frontier zone between the southeast and the southwest, and Spiro becomes the intermediary between items coming from the southwest to the east and from the east to the west. That becomes a high trading partnership for the folks at Spiro. And that's part of the reason why they became so powerful in the east, because they controlled a monopoly.
Are there some other examples of the commodities that were traded within the Mississippian culture?
Oh, basically anything. For us, some of the high value items are going to be bison material. So the women are farmers. It's all done by hand. There's no plow animals, so it's all by your kids and you doing the handwork. And it's mostly by hoes, stone hoes mostly. And some of those hoe heads can be up to 6 pounds plus the handle, which doesn't sound like much to most of us, but at the end of an 8-hour to 12-hour day, it's starting to weigh heavy on your mind. So when women wanted something that was the same, gives you a wide base, and is strong, keeps an edge well, but wanted it much, much lighter. The only thing that they had available that would do that bill was bison scapula, the shoulder blade. Less than a pound, same, I'll get there, baby, I will. So you have all the characteristics, but much less weight. Well, the main herd of bison was in central Oklahoma, central Kansas, well, south central Kansas, north central Texas at that time, all controlled by Spiro. So if you wanted bison scapula, tibias, which are used for digging tools, like shovels, dried meat, furs, hides, you had, to deal with the monopoly that Spiro controlled through both the Red and the Arkansas River Valley. So for the women, the miracle tool was monopolized by the leaders at Spiro. For the men, remember, their main food source that they're bringing in is large meat resources. Their main tool for using that is bows and arrows. Now you can make bows out of practically any wood you want if you make it thick enough and long enough. The problem is, that means you have to have a very long bow for most of the woods you had available in the U.S., meaning that the bow is going to be 5.5 to 6.5 feet tall. But the men are only about 5'4" on average. So the bow is going to have to be bigger than you are. Also, because of the kinds of woods that were available, you're talking about maybe 35 to 40 pounds of pull. The amount of pound of pullage means the amount of energy that you can release. The greater the energy release, the greater the distance, the greater killing capacity. The single best bow making wood in the U.S., though, is what the French refer to it as bois d'arc, Osage orange, or horseapple. Horseapple, a bow d'arc, you can make, because of the kind of wood it is, it can be smaller, so 4.5 to 5.5 feet, as opposed to 5.5 to 6.5 feet. Thinner, so your weight level is low. And instead of 35 to 40 pounds of pull, you get 65 to 75 pounds of pull. Twice the energy release, which means you can be further away from an animal and kill it with more accuracy and more strength behind it. Meaning, a regular bow and arrow, you're talking about maybe 1 out of every 12 attempts is going to be successful. With a bow d'arc bow, you're talking about maybe 1 out of every 6 or 7. Twice as successful. And what I said before, men are always looking for opportunities not to have to work as much. So, bow d'arc, though, is the preferred wood. Every guy wanted it. But where are the native stands of bow d'arc? The only native stands of bow d'arc are in southeastern Oklahoma, southwestern Arkansas, northeastern Texas, and northwestern Louisiana, all controlled by Spiro. So the women had the monopoly, their tools was all held by Spiro. For the men, the monopoly of the best tool they wanted was all held by Spiro. You also had lots of other stuff that only was available in our area that was high importance, but those are the main ones that we see. It's an incredible power that the folks at Spiro were able to exert into political power and to be able to do as coordinative power throughout the rest of the nation. And then those ambassadors give them even greater connectivity and control over what the Mississippians call their most important items. For the elites, they wanted stuff that was special, identifiably unique, but also regulated. So for the elites, their main things are conch shell and copper. The conch, although you can pick up seashells practically anywhere along the coastline of the U.S., there are some special ones that they wanted. Misicon perversum and contrarium. They're conch, or big whelks. Most of the whelk here in the U.S., along coastal waters, semi-tropical and tropical waters, go right-handed, clockwise, in the way they add shell. Except for Misicon perversum and contrarium. They go counterclockwise. And the only place where that kind of shell occurs in the size, to impress people, I mean, some are that long and that big around, and thick, because you need to be able to engrave it and transmit information over long distances without it breaking, was in the southern tip of Florida, northern Keys. Spiro has an ambassador there, so only they get it. Going directly from that area up here by boat, engraved with information, disseminated to those ambassadors. The ambassadors disseminate the information, and then eventually it all comes back with those ambassadors because it's status. It shows how important they are in this life and in the afterlife. Spiro also has an ambassador up in northeast Iowa at what's called effigy mounds, because that gave them, I know, gave them absolute control, well, first control over the copper coming from the Great Lakes, mostly the UP. Copper and conch shell, again, are the golden diamonds in their society. The more important you are, the more access you had, the better you were. And the leaders here at Spiro end up with more conch shell and copper than any other side of the nation. In fact, the preservation of the cloth and the basketry here at Spiro, in part, is so great because of the copper. Because as the copper sat in the burials, the copper oxides and sulfides from the decaying copper act as preservatives on carbon-based materials. So things that normally would have decayed oftentimes are preserved just because of the contact with that copper. It's an incredible sight. And in fact, we're still learning things about it all the time.